Good afternoon and welcome to our SACAC webinar leading us into what is hopefully going to be a very restful holiday break for everyone. We're here today to talk about juniors and the junior process. And before we introduce our panelists, just a few reminders. The registration for the Super Conference is open and we look forward to seeing you all there. So don't delay, go ahead and register today. Also, dry run faculty application and interest forms have been sent out. And so if you think that you'd like to contribute to new members in our profession, we would love to hear from you and to hear what you have to offer. So our panelists will introduce ourselves and then we'll get underway.
All right. Hi, I'm Amelia Johnson. I'm Director of College Advising at Indian Springs School, which is right outside of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm in my first year here. We're an independent day and boarding school, and I have between 60 and 75 students in each class. Prior to being here, I was at Baylor School in the Office of College Counseling for 4 years. So happy to be here. Hi to all my SACAC friends and colleagues.
Hi, I'm Sam Aleinikoff. I'm the founder and executive director of College AIM, which is a CBO at Towers High School in DeKalb County in Georgia, the metro Atlanta area. We've been up and running for close to 4 years now, and I've been at the school for 6 in total. We don't have any college counselors, so we kind of serve as the in-house CBO that does all of the college counseling here. We've got between 200 and 250 students per class, and so we work with close to 1,000 students on a given year.
And hi, I'm Peter Olrich. I'm the Director of College and Guidance Counseling at Gulliver Schools in Miami, Florida. We have 4 campuses, K-12 at our school, but I work with the Prep and Miller Drive campuses where we have about 1,000 kids, 230 in the senior class. Prior to my work at Gulliver, I worked at Brooks School in North Andover, Massachusetts for 15 years. I was the Director and Dean of College Counseling there, and then spent 4 years helping to start the Bay School of San Francisco as the first ever college counselor at that school. We kind of sent the first 2 classes out into the world. And really happy to be here with you today.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm Erin McCubbin, and I'm happy to host this webinar again. And the man behind the curtain is Dave Mabe. And so if you do have any technical issues, please utilize the chat to let us know, and we can try to help you. In the same vein, if you have a question for one of our panelists, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can put a question out there and we will integrate it in to our conversation, but there'll also be an open time for Q&A at the end. So we'll go ahead and get started. Amelia, I'm just curious, in your office right now, what's going on? What are juniors doing other than, getting ready for break?
Right. Getting ready. Break can't come quickly enough for most of us. So, well, I just got back actually from a meeting to discuss PSAT scores with both 10th and 11th graders. So right now, those scores are on students' mind, accessing those scores, troubleshooting, accessing the scores, and also just trying to help them understand what those mean and how to use those as we look to plan for standardized testing coming up in winter and spring. So I've also had the opportunity to meet in both large and small groups with my 11th graders over the last few months. And really, in the first meeting especially, I found it really important to kind of clarify what roles and expectations are going to be. So what do I do as the college advisor? What is the student's role in the process? What should the parent role be in the process? So that they just have a sense of what I'm here for, and the extent to which I can help them, which things they're responsible for, that sort of thing. And then in other group meetings, we've talked a little more broadly about accessing Naviance, making sure everyone can get in there and knows what it is, knows how to use it to do research about colleges. We've also talked about sort of our school's philosophical approach to college advising, what we think it's important as a school community to focus on in the college search process, how to think through what matters to the individual student about the college search and admission process, and also stress the importance of communicating with their families about what's going on with college search. And then we also maintain it's a royal we, it's just me, so I maintain a class page. I know a lot of schools use Moodle or something like it. We use something called Whipple Hill here. So I keep a whole lot of resources there for 11th graders so that they can access that stuff whenever they get ready to, preferably before I force them to do it. But so there's information there that I've been working to update for them. And then finally, because of the small size of my school, I have the opportunity to do individual appointments with students throughout the spring semester. So I'm gearing up for that by having students complete sort of personal information surveys in Naviance, and also think through some larger questions so that they're ready to talk about those things when they arrive. And then during those sessions, we'll be talking through the standardized testing sequence and course planning for next year in particular, as well as sort of kicking off the college search in a more personalized way. So, and one other thing I'm noticing this week is we're getting early decision and some early action answers back from seniors. I'm doing some sort of information control PR sort of stuff with juniors who are seeing what's going on around them with their older peers, and are presenting in my office with lots of interesting questions about what those decisions mean. So I'm trying to use what's going on with 12th graders to sort of teach and correct misinformation among 11th graders as well. So that's all that's going on as we prepare for a break here at Indian Springs.
It sounds so busy. But we know in this work that it is so cyclical, right? You know,
right.
We're working with different grades at different times. I'm so curious, you mentioned the small groups and the larger groups with your juniors. Where do you carve out that time?
Right.
Is it before school? Is it after school? What kind of schedule are you on? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, I think this is a real challenge for a lot of us. Every school has different kinds of schedules, and then depending on the size of your class, even having space to meet with students can be a challenge. So here we're on a rotating schedule that I can't even begin to explain. I'm still learning it, but we do have a common block each day from 3:22 to 4 o'clock, and that is typically, it's called X block. It's sort of like an extra help block that some schools offer sometimes in the morning, but we just do it in the afternoon. So I use that time and just require juniors to be here with me during that time and sort of let faculty know, and they tend to be pretty flexible in letting students out of extra help agreements for the one day that they're going to be here with me. So I ask students to take responsibility for planning around athletic practices or other things they may need to start. And we just use that that sort of extra help block. We also have a daily break. It's pretty short, but it works well for things like today's quick chat about PSAT scores. So I try not to I try to spread that out so that students don't feel pressured to be in college advising meetings when they should really be in extra help or participating in other things. But we have about 3 or 4 meetings across the whole first semester during that common time.
Okay. And the survey that you mentioned that you're having the students take prior to these individual meetings, what sort of things are you asking them?
Yeah, so Naviance, if you have access to it, provides great resources for establishing surveys that you can kind of glean all kinds of information from students. And there's a whole sort of set of sample surveys out there you can use and access. So what I'm using right now is a personal data survey. I don't know if that's like a template already in Naviance. It probably is. It's similar to something I used at my prior school, but that's giving me information about the students' family backgrounds, particularly family educational backgrounds, as well as just some basic information about what their academic interests are presently, what kinds of extracurricular activities they're participating in, colleges they've already visited, or colleges they've been thinking about. And then I give them that a little earlier in the first semester. And then as we go into these individual meetings in the spring, or winter really, but spring semester, I'm asking for some more detailed writing about, again, sort of academic interests, what they're hoping to get out of a college experience, what sorts of places they want to look, what they're excited about. I ask about books they've been reading, favorite movies or music, and those really are most informative to kind of jump into conversations with students who I don't know well, but also to inform the writing of counselor evaluations. Sometimes there's information they'll provide there that just might not come up otherwise in a conversation. And so when it comes to knowing more about really what drives the student, what their sort of deeper interests are, those surveys can be really enlightening when the student takes the time to provide sort of appropriate answers. But they give you like a comfortable starting place in terms of already knowing sort of enough about the student to strike up that conversation, and also to capture information, again, particularly about family educational background. That's sometimes the only way I know if a student is a first-generation student, for example. So.
Well, and that's great. With time being such an important commodity for all of us, no matter where we work, having that information up front allows us to maximize the time with our students. We had a question from a viewer about sharing those surveys. And yes, we will talk with the panelists. And if we have any kind of that survey that we use in our office, we'll share it as a follow-up to this webinar, because that's a great tool for everyone to use. And so Amelia, my last question for you is, with these surveys and utilizing Navigance and all of these meetings, how do you track what you've done with students? So if you've done their meeting, if you've had their survey, how do you keep track of all of that?
Yeah, so I'm a lover of spreadsheets and of Google Drive. And so I keep just a sheet in Google with my whole junior class in it, and also my senior class. And I've got a column for we've had our first appointment, a column for you've completed this survey, a column for example, with seniors, what's the earliest deadline, so I can keep track of when I need to provide or have counselor evaluation letters ready. And I find that really helpful. It's time consuming, and again, I can do that because I have a small class. It's time consuming to go through and kind of mark those records, but it does help me keep up with what I need to do with each student. And in the event there is an issue where a student really isn't showing up consistently, or a parent might have questions about a student's level of involvement in the programs that we're offering, I can kind of look back and see how they've engaged with me. Also, I use a Google Calendar heavily to schedule my student appointments, and I learned this year that there's a way that I can set up slots for students to claim, send them a link, and they can sort of come in and type their name into a slot. And so then I've got a calendar record of when I've met with students, and I just mark them if they don't show up, so that I can look quickly at my calendar and see who's been coming in for those sorts of things. But I love Google Drive. I love Google Forms for RSVPs and signups for knowing when students came to something or at least registered for something. The spreadsheet function is really helpful. I use the documents and a spreadsheet in Google Drive to help manage my teacher recommendations. So that's a really fun set of tools, and accessible and easy to use, and free for people who are looking for good sort of organizational tools. So.
This webinar is not sponsored by Google, but I get my enthusiastic recommendation for the Google Suite too.
Yeah.
It is absolutely wonderful. Well, Amelia, thank you so much for your time, and we'll have her back at the end for questions. Sam, are you with us?
I am.
So we're going to, thinking of this idea, when you gave your introduction, I was struck by the volume of students that you work with. That definitely stood right out to me. So hearing some of the tactics that Amelia is able to do at a smaller school, obviously that doesn't translate perfectly for anybody who's working with a larger number of students. So what does it look like for you right now with your juniors? What are you working on? How are you keeping track of such a large number?
So I think you're definitely right, Erin. We do have, I guess, relatively few touch points with our juniors, especially first semester. So right now I'm actually just starting to get the number of touch points that I'd like. First semester, we really, we aim for 2 different ways to get in contact with our kids, with our juniors, I should say. We do classroom push-ins, which have been particularly effective because they're going to be there, and our kids have to listen, kind of a captive audience. And then we also have after-school programming where we run several workshops. And then as we get into the spring, that's where we are able to kind of focus more on our juniors once a lot of our seniors have kind of been taken care of. But I guess the main thing that we do in the fall and in the winter first semester, we ensure that we're kind of giving them a primer for exposure. 90% or so of our students will be first generation college students. Most of our students come from families where college has not really been discussed much at home, and if it has, it's been really vague. You need to go to college, not so much how they're going to get there or what the different types of options are. So first semester, we really give a primer for any exposure that we're going to give. We try to get kids on college campuses second semester, but we really prep them for that experience first semester. So what that looks like is kind of running that typical GPA game with our juniors at the beginning of the year, maybe a broad case study program. We talk to them about different types of colleges and have very intentional workshops about understanding the differences between public and private colleges, because they have this very kind of static mindset of public and private high schools, and they don't quite understand the difference at the college level. So we talk a lot about that, about understanding the differences between technical colleges, 2-year schools and 4-year schools, colleges and universities, et cetera, et cetera. And then we do a lot of work also kind of on the prep for interaction and interfacing with college representatives. So we do a lot of work around professionalism and networking with those individuals, how to ask good questions when they're on college campuses. And then second semester is really when they get to use those skills that we've taught them. So we have a curriculum, a loose curriculum, unfortunately, because we have a lot of students. It kind of varies how many students are able to get to each one of those types of programs that we use first semester, and then second semester is when we kind of throw them to the wolves and let them use it.
Mm-hmm. So if there's a college recruiter who's tuning into this webinar, is there something that they could do to help you fill a need as you work with your seniors?
I appreciate you asking that question and giving us the space for the pitch. Specifically with juniors, we love it when college representatives can come and kind of help us run those workshops after school. So whether it is running the GPA game or running a small case study for a group of 30 to 40 of our students, whether it is being the guinea pigs for the professionalism workshop, so they're willing to kind of take the brunt of our kids maybe not knowing how to introduce themselves or maybe not knowing how to write a professional email yet, but really working with kids around those skills and skill building exercises. We always welcome people who want to come in and help with that process. And what we found is that the individuals who come and work with our kids often end up getting a lot of applications on the back end, because in turn, they kind of convince a few kids to apply to their schools, I guess as a shameless pitch.
Well, that's a pretty great added benefit. One of the wonderful resources that SACAC also provides is a list of CBOs that have at some point been involved with SACAC. And so if you're a college recruiter and you're tuning in and you want to get involved, I'm sure Sam would love your email, but also there are a multitude of organizations that partner through SACAC that we could connect you with. So Sam, what are some specific strategies that you found with juniors that help them think beyond maybe the schools that they've heard of before or their notions of public, private? Like what's in your toolkit outside of the GPA game or some of those things?
I think a lot of that comes into play second semester. So that's what we're gearing up for right now in terms of providing that exposure. So we have a few different ways that we start to do that. The first is we ensure that, and this is a new goal this year, so we're working on reaching it still, that every junior is present for at least one visit from a college representative during that year, which is new for us. We usually have our top 30 or 40 kids, maybe 50, who are all over every visit. But this year we're trying to ensure that every junior gets to at least one. So by the time they get to their senior year, they know what they're doing a little bit better. That's kind of the baseline beginning of the exposure. Then we run 3 local college trips. So we ensure that kids get to different types of colleges. We usually run one to the AUC, the Atlanta University Center, which is Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark Atlanta, 3 historically black colleges, to ensure that that's an option. We ensure that we run one to either a community college or a technical college. So there are kids who are thinking in that realm have that opportunity. And then we do one to a local public institution as well, a 4-year institution though. So kids kind of have the opportunity to see different ones. Now, not all 225 juniors are coming on any of these trips. Our goal is to ensure that every one of those 225 though is on one of those 3. And that's also a new goal because we've really been expanding our junior programming this year. So that's the second part. The third part comes when we talk with our kids who are really considering more selective schools, kids who have the opportunity to be really competitive in those selective pools. And we run 2 trips that kind of work with those students. The first is a trip over spring break, which is tough, I know, on the college end, because that is the first week in April, which is probably the worst time to be on a college campus for college offices. But it's when we can take the kids off campus. So that's when we do it. And for the past 4 years, we've run a trip to Boston and back, visiting 15 schools in about 8 days. And on that trip, again, we try to provide exposure to different types of schools. So each year, we ensure that we see the University of Georgia, our flagship state institution. We see Howard, so we have a highly selective, historically Black college on the list. We ensure that we see Columbia, so we see one of the most selective institutions. And beyond that, we really work to add as many colleges that meet the full need for our kids, because most of our kids have an EFC of 0. And we also work to find test optional schools, because our kids often do not test at levels that really reflect how bright and how capable they are. And then the third thing that we really look for are schools that meet our 3 main needs, which are academic, financial, and social inclusion and preparation and support for our kids. And each year we're able to find 15 colleges that are really interested in meeting our kids and have put on fantastic programming despite the time of year. And then as we move forward, the relationships that we build and our kids are able to build, because they understand the professionalism piece, understand how to ask good questions, because what we do first semester, they're really able to flourish on that trip and develop relationships that then lead to fly-in programs the following year, and often will lead to acceptances, scholarship money, things that are invaluable for us.
So what are some of your go-to resources, web-based, when you're encouraging a student to do some research online, or if you're stumped in helping a student find a fit? What are some of the websites you frequent or tools that you use?
We start, honestly, with the broadest, which for me is College Board, and starting with the filters on the left side of the screen and having kids search for colleges. When we really drill down to stuff that's first gen or underrepresented minority student, which is 99% of our population specific, we rely heavily on College Greenlight. They have a really wonderful list of fly-in programs, and they also have a really wonderful list of colleges that meet 100% of demonstrated need. So we use those two tools, and we've used those to create a list of about 130 different institutions that could be financially viable for our kids. So we have this list of about 130, which is expanding every year, which we're really excited about, that we are able to provide to our kids. And we often say, here's your list of 130. Now it's your turn, and kind of start there, which is a big task for a 16 or 17-year-old who knows very little about college, but that's at least a starting point, and then we whittle down the list from there.
Okay, and my final question for you, Sam, is with your juniors as they go through this process, without access to Naviance as a school, how are you tracking their applications into senior year or those different pieces? How do you help them and yourself and your team stay on track?
I rely heavily, as we've heard before, on Excel and on Google Docs, Google spreadsheets. We actually do a lot of Google Forms for surveys, which is helpful because I get it directly into a Google spreadsheet in Excel, where we are asking kids for updates on what they're doing, but obviously we don't get a great response rate with a lot of our kids. So a lot of it comes from individual touch points. Second semester, I will meet with every junior in the school to have at least one touch point, which is not what I would like, but at least gives me kind of a baseline going into senior year of what I need to be doing. And then to track that information, it's purely in Excel at this point.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. We really appreciate your insight, and Sam will be available at the end again for Q&A. But to reiterate, the second tool that you mentioned outside of the College Board search function was College Greenlight. And I believe, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fly-in list is available on their blog to any person who searches for it. But if you are a CBO, you can actually register to get an account, and you get a deeper access of resources and tools that you can invite your students to be a part of as well. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. Yep. And the other thing I should mention is the list that they have of colleges that meet 100% of demonstrated need. It's really helpful. There are a lot of lists out there. Theirs in particular I found is helpful because it really thoroughly explains the financial aid policies. So it tells you, given different income bands, often what loans might be in place for your students and things of that nature. So that's been helpful from College Greenlight as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as we've talked through what's going on with juniors, let's just round that question out. Is there anything going on for your juniors or on your agenda that's different than what we've heard from our other panelists?
It's for us, I think there's a lot that Amelia and Sam said that resonates with where we are too. I think with my arrival this summer, we're in the process of changing a lot of our junior programming. But basically in January, we have about 200 juniors, and in January we're going to be doing individual family and student meetings all together, and that'll take us into mid to late February to do all those. We'll be covering everything from course selection to kind of thinking about individual testing plans to beginning to think about the guiding forces of a list that's more firm than anything they've done. And the kids and we will take it from there to kind of do work together on Naviance and produce a list and talk about summer and keep ahead on what's happening for the spring. But a lot of what Sam and Amelia said is certainly resonates.
Rings true, absolutely. So you mentioned those meetings with parents that will be coming up on your agenda, and sometimes parents are affectionately called, the third wheel of the college process, because as college counselors, we try to empower our students so much to take ownership, but parents have amazing intentions and they want the best for their children, and so we do inevitably have a lot of interaction with that community. So I'm just going to give you the question straight up. What do you do when a parent's expectation for their child for college does not align with where the student is or what the student wants?
I've actually never had that happen. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't believe
that. I think that over time, I've been doing this for 21 years now, and I think when I first began, I often felt like there's that scene in Animal House when everything's going crazy at the end of the movie and someone's standing in the middle of the crowd going, remain calm, remain calm. Just felt run over by parents in a lot of the process. And I think over time, I've come to value, it's really, I used to try to appease parents when I started in college counseling, and you try to convince them that you have a plan. And then over time, I've really worked to try to partner with parents, in a different way. And some of that is I've worked with a range of international families who come from, kind of different backgrounds and have different sensibilities about a family's involvement in the process. Some much more hands-off, some who really resent the hands-off idea, right? And just worked with enough different kinds of folks to start to feel that partnership is really the goal. That said, you're never in any given year going to make every family happy with with outcomes. But the goal is to help them feel at least that they can trust the process and trust the people involved in the process.
I love the word partnerships. Can you give us some specific examples of ways that you partner with juniors, parents?
Yeah, with junior parents, I will say that the last, both in San Francisco and at Brooks School, I actually took a program that had traditionally been a 2-year program, junior and senior year, and brought it back to sophomore year a little bit, not to do extensive college counseling with sophomores, but actually just to establish relationships and do a little bit of light programming, invite parent contact before the heat was on so that there could be some kind of, established rapport. Some of that is, making sure we did presentations to 9th and 10th grade parents at, Parents Weekend in the fall at both schools, just to be a presence and be a face and kind of give a sense that we have a process, that we care about them and their kids' needs. And some of that allows for when the heat comes on junior year, if you've already established some kind of rapport and presence in their life and in the kids' life, it can make a real difference for the way that you engage with them then. At both those schools, we were actually able to meet with kids individually as sophomores as part of our process. We introduced that so that it really kind of changed the temperature of the initial junior meetings. In my current school, we're not able to do that, but we are still working to engage with sophomore parents at a few stops so that when they meet with us as juniors, there's already been a good relationship established. With junior parents now, I think that some of the things that have made a big difference in each of the schools that I've worked at, I really try with junior parents. I really like to get them all together for some kind of kickoff event. And again, I've worked in different size schools. Sometimes that's been, 60 families at one school, and this year it's going to be over 200 families. But the the goal is really just to appeal to their better angels and their better instincts at this point, and to let them know that we have a good understanding of the kind of things that are pushing and pulling at them, and to really address this as a change in family dynamics and as their kids getting ready to leave home, and to talk about the forces pushing and pulling on their better instincts as parents before we get into the plans, and so we've done some events that have been really useful. We've done some kickoff events that have had anywhere from 5 to 10 admissions panelists, and we'll sometimes break up the kids, and they'll do a case study for half of it, reading 4 admission files, and then they'll do a panel for the other half with those they did the case studies with. And then the parents will do the opposite. They'll do a panel first, and then they'll break into case study groups. And that's accomplished a few things. Number one, I think anytime parents see you interacting with college admission officers and feel that there are relationships and that you're trusted enough to have people there, they recognize that these are human beings reading admission files, and it's not some kind of massive bureaucratic system that is impersonal. That can make a big difference. And then we also use those events to then present our plans for the year and for the upcoming year, 18 months, to parents, let them know what's going on in detail. But for me, I've always tried to present that in a way where, we're constantly acknowledging the range of pressures and conversations that they're having, and media pressure, and Aunt Martha, the college expert, and every other parent at a rink and a sideline. And we'll just keep talking about the things they're going to hear that are going to push them off their game. Mm-hmm. Appealing to their better instincts as parents, and kind of staying focused on helping their kids treat this as an important teachable moment.
Well, I think you're exactly right. Building those relationships and having a presence with parents before the pressure of the immediacy of junior and senior year is an invaluable way, to offset any potential conflicts. We have a specific question for you, Peter, from one of our attendees in terms of the logistics of your parent meeting. So to get clarification, do you do individually, like you do 200 parent meetings before February, or what does that structure look like for your office?
No, I'm fortunate. We have here at Gulliver, we have a 4-year guidance model. So there are actually 7 of us here for about 800 kids. And so there are about 200 juniors. So really, we each need to do anywhere between 25 and 35 of those junior family meetings through January and into February. And obviously, if it were just me and one other person, we wouldn't organize things the same way. We try to get the same information out there in a different format, but probably not be able to do quite as much individual time. But that's how it's working here.
And I think if we talk to colleagues across the country, timing would be different for different schools depending on how their schedule and how their calendar year parses out. But it seems to be pretty typical that parent meetings are in the spring. Is that what you see too, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the real heat of the process, at least in most of the independent schools I've worked on, is kind of second half of junior year and into the senior summer, right? And so obviously any goodwill you can put in the bank before that is great, and again, that can just be presentations. It can be creating a blog for people who are interested in college trends. It can be, even just sharing a Facebook page with kind of things that are going on in the news. But just being a presence in families' life. If your school has a newsletter, putting a college corner in it, just offering some facts, just any invitation of contact to keep the temperature down is always really worthwhile. But then, yeah, I think that it's great to be able to meet with families just before the temperature really rises in the second half of junior year. And I've worked in my environment in San Francisco was a bunch of entrepreneurs who were very open-minded about the school. My environment in New England was maybe a more entitled environment, and then here in Miami, I actually have some very entitled, folks who kind of think they know the whole game. I also have a bunch of international families and first-gen families who really need to be educated in a very different way about the process they're entering into. And so with those folks, we'll try to do more programming early on that's more college 101, explaining the U.S. system, explaining financial aid, explaining the kind of things that are going to be pivotal to those families before we get into the heart of the selection process and list making.
What's your pulse on standardized testing in junior year? One of the attendees is curious, for juniors, do you recommend that they complete their testing junior year? Do you see any trends in when students are starting to test? What does that process look like for you?
In our population, there's a real variety there. You know, I mean, we have some kids who come to us as, you know, with English as a second language, and, you know, who may be in Algebra 2 as a junior, right? For those kids, I'm not going to be pushing them to finish testing, you know, junior year. I think there's very likely to see their best scores sometime during senior year, whatever those best scores are going to be. But then we have a thriving IB program and a rich AP program here as well. And some of those kids are very ready to be done testing even in the middle of junior year, you know. And so I think if you have an opportunity at all to catch kids on an individual basis, you know, then kind of helping them figure out, you know, where they are in the curriculum and what testing plan will make the most sense for them is something that's great to do. But I think it's, you know, it's tough to try to create a one-size-fits-all if you have a diverse population. It's challenging, you know, but I think if you're not able to have the individual time with each kid, then you just try to foresee the different scenarios and communicate with parents about, you know, the possible tracks, and then welcome communication to help them make decisions.
Well, and if you're a school that does PSAT testing with your juniors, then, or sophomores, or any grade level, then that can also be a good indicator for you as a college counselor in thinking about when a student might be ready to test, what gaps they may have, and even what test might be the most successful. But you're exactly right. It is very individualized based on the student. So Peter, what would you say is your flagship or signature program that you do? You mentioned so many different wonderful ideas of ways to connect with parents or the community, but do you have one that you just think, this is the one that we really have that maximizes our relationships with our community?
I think you know, and I'm in a new environment this year, and there were too many logistical hurdles and too much convincing to do the junior program that I've traditionally done in my last two schools. We're going to do it next year, though. And for me, catching families, you know, in the middle of junior year in January or February with a group of admissions professionals, you know, and then again, like we've created the last, you know, 15 of the last 18 years, I've used a case study, you know, method where we'll have an hour and a half where we'll have one admission officer with, you know, anywhere from, you know, 20 to 40 parents, or, you know, 10 to 20 kids, you know, and they'll be working to review 2 files and to make admissions decisions as a committee. That process, even though it's a massive undertaking to get the cases together and to do all the work, and I'm happy to try to provide resources from my last couple of schools if people want to see that. The process of sitting with an admissions professional and having to make decisions when you realize you can't just take everyone who seems strong enough to take, but you've been given directives on the kind of kids you're looking for and how many spaces you have. It really changes parent perspectives, especially on what the process is all about. And so I think creating an event where you have the opportunity to do case study work, if at all possible, plus have panels of admissions folks who are there, who are saying good things about your school and your work with their kids, who are there to answer questions when they hear it directly from the horse's mouth. It makes such a difference, right, in the way it feels. And so for all the years that we've run a program like that, we've always come out of it feeling like, we just created so much trust today and got so much good information out there. And it's a massive undertaking, but it has been really worth it. If I were, you know, I'm at a big enough school here with a lack of small space, with a lack of big spaces rather, where it's harder to do it. And I know if I were, you know, I went to Newton North High School near Boston. There were 2,800 of us there at the time. So I know for our college counselor to have pulled that off with 680 seniors would have been very difficult. But at the very least, doing the admissions panels and getting parents involved in that way, the case studies, if at all possible. For me, if you do that in the middle of junior year, parents come out feeling excited, they're much better informed, and they're ready to engage in your programming in a whole different way. And there's a level of trust and connection that you've demonstrated to the process that brings them in a different space, which I think is really important.
I have to echo that. I think the case study is one of the most valuable, when I was on the college side and now on the high school side, one of the most valuable activities I've participated in. Another way to even think about it is we do one with our board every few years. And it really helps in a private school manage expectations for a board about what it looks like for a student in the application process. So I know we've gotten a lot of interest from the attendees on this webinar on case studies and what that looks like. So again, our emails will be up at the end of this presentation. And if you'd like to know more, please reach out and we'd be happy to share any resources that we have. But we're going to open it up and bring back Sam and Amelia as well. So if you have any lingering questions at all, it does not have to be specific to something we talked about today regarding juniors, but maybe something you'd like to know more about, or something that you'd like us to share on your behalf to this webinar, we'd be happy to do that. So we'll give it a couple of minutes on the Q&A, and then we will be wrapping up for the afternoon. So thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We've had very active questions during the presentation. We actually had 10 that came in that we were able to integrate into the questions, so that's really exciting. While we're giving it a second, do any of our panelists have something that they wanted to, that maybe we talked about with another person that you wanted to jump in or chime in on?
I have a couple of comments. One is on the case studies front. We did this in Chattanooga, where I worked prior to coming here to Birmingham, as a multi-school event. And I know many cities have sort of like a citywide case studies program that several schools will participate in. And we piggybacked it onto our big spring college fair. So we already had a lot of reps in town, and we did it in the convention center space, which isn't ideal, but we just set up round tables in a big room that we already had reserved for college fair purposes. And while it was noisy and a little chaotic, it tended to still be a really good event, and we could get a lot of students into the room and parents and a lot of reps there because they were already there for the fair. So that might be an idea for some folks out there who have bigger populations, or you know, maybe you're in a community where there are several schools that could work together on something like that. One other tool, it's not really a tool, but I've found using and publishing a timeline really helpful with 11th graders and their parents in particular. I think knowing what to expect during different times of year is part of the anxiety that parents experience. When do we need to be applying for things? When should my student be taking standardized testing? When should we be working on financial aid? And so laying all that out in a really simple sort of 11th and 12th grade timeline, I've found that to be pretty helpful with my families, at least in my independent school settings. And I would imagine that's something you can scale up to a much bigger set of students as well. It's an easy thing to put out there on your school website or email out or even post around the school. And now I'm even using one for 9th through 12th grade, so that when I have 9th and 10th grade parents asking questions about when things are supposed to be happening, they've got, again, sort of a front and back 2-page document, or 1-page really document they can look at and kind of know, okay, yes, we're on track. We're not behind. Things are moving along the way they're supposed to. So.
We all love being able to check boxes.
Yeah.
It's so fantastic.
Right.
So we have 2 questions that have come up. The first, Sam, is specifically for you. With the programs that you're doing to get students on college campuses, so like your spring break trip in particular, how do you get that funding? Where does that come from?
I wish there was a simple answer to this. So we are working this year to get more funding ahead of time from corporations in the area. And I'm just now getting the list of contacts. I had a meeting last night with someone who said to run similar programming, she has 300 to 400 business contacts in the metro Atlanta area who she reaches out to every year, at least 4 months prior to the trip. And I don't quite have time for that. So I don't know if we'll hit 300 to 400 this year. So we're hoping to take a chunk of it out of the kind of corporate giving type of atmosphere. Largely though, it is student raised. Each year, our spring break trip costs between $15,000 and $20,000. Last couple of years, it's landed around $18,000, which is a huge undertaking when kids don't have money to pay for the SAT, which is $50. So we have them raise the money themselves, which I find builds a lot of the professionalism, networking kind of drive to go to college skills that we're trying to build anyway. We are very lucky to have a principal that's on our side. So he's allowed our students to turn into the walking vending machines for the school. I go to Sam's Club twice a week, stock up on snacks that cost 50 cents a pop, and my kids sell them for $1 a piece. And we make a ton of money doing that. It sounds ridiculous, but that's what we do. We have other random small fundraisers. We host a local celebrity basketball game that raises a few $1,000 each year. Various stuff, but it's all student-led and student-directed. I loop 3 or 4 other teachers into this as well. So we have 4 teachers this year who each will be responsible for leading students to raise $4,000, and I'll find the rest. So each one of those teachers gets a cohort of 8 to 10 kids, and they plan and run their own fundraisers. I find that giving students the power to do that, although it's really time consuming on our end and a lot of stress, empowers our kids to take control of their own college search and their own college trip. They feel like it's a really important thing to do, rather than just their parents put down $250, $300, $500, however much it costs per kid, and they go off on the trip.
That's a lot of work.
It is, but it's worthwhile, and the kids get really into it.
Absolutely. So the next question, the questions have started rolling in now, so panelists get ready. So thinking about the spring and how we utilize our springs, if I were an admission representative, would it be more effective for me to do high school visits to you in the spring, or to participate in some of these activities as a way to engage your juniors? Which would you prefer?
I'll jump in real quick, and then I'll get off so I'm not talking too much. For us, I think there are 2 ways really to engage. One, put up with us coming in April and be excited about us being on campus and really show us your school. And secondarily, to come for the events we put on. It's really tough for us to schedule stuff during the school day with juniors. We found that we've had more problems working with teachers to kind of pull juniors out of class when there's less urgency in their mind. So the larger scale events and then college visits themselves tend to be the 2 best ways to interact with us.
Amelia or Peter, anything to add?
I would echo that. I mean, I think for, we just moved to a block schedule, pulling juniors out of class in the spring when they're getting ready for comprehensive exams and for all that. It's really hard for us to do. It's hard to find the right time. But when we obviously participating in any events that we do with programming gives you face time with a lot of people and their families, which is, we're always really excited when folks help us with events like that. But at the same time, I would say if spring visits here are what work best for you, you'll generally, I know in any of our offices, you'll obviously find us to talk with, a chance to refresh relationships, to hear what's going on at your school, to be able to try to find kids that can visit with you, even if it's not as big a crowd as you would have at another time. We'd rather have you do that than not be on campus for most of us, right? Or have you on site. So, whatever's going to work best for you on the college side, we obviously want to honor and work with too.
Absolutely. So in speaking about parent programming and just in general college counseling program that you do, if any of you work with a high Hispanic Latino population or other populations whose native language isn't English, how do you handle that? Do you hire interpreters for the events? Do you invite presenters who are native speakers? What strategies have you used?
I will say, it's interesting stepping into Miami. We have the vast majority of our kids are functioning really well in English. Not all the families are, and certainly in my previous boarding school that I worked at as well, we had a number of families who weren't proficient in English, and so we've done a range of things. I think having web translation for your content, that you have online is one piece that's really helpful to families and sometimes overlooked. There are some translators that are more generic that don't always do a great job, but at least start to get the message across. Obviously, professional translation is a great step if a school can take it or if a group can take it. But then I also really, we've taken it as a real priority in each of my last couple of schools to make sure that, we'll do special programming for families for whom, if Spanish is their first language and that's what they're comfortable in. We've done a couple of events in Spanish where we've had translation and have had help from teachers and from sometimes other parents in our population, right? And then in individual meetings, Often the kids are the best translators, but then sometimes you can see those dynamics get complicated, right? So occasionally, if there's a a teacher or someone else who the family knows in the community, who you want to help make the connection with, we'll take advantage of the opportunity to do that as well. But I will say, it's easy to get to just start throwing emails out and to communicate en masse and to have the best intentions of getting to families who aren't going to necessarily be able to do that as easily. But the more you can do to reach those families and make sure that they know that you value them and want to hold them as well in the process, that's really time well spent.
Excellent. And our last question that we have up is for a new college counselor. When you're preparing for a junior meeting, what are some of the things that you do to prepare? In particular, what if you're new to learning about colleges and you don't really have a wide breadth of knowledge? How do you answer the question when a student or parent asks you about something that you don't know the answer to? Or in general, what other preparation strategies do you have?
I can chime in on this. I remember pretty clearly my first set of meetings with juniors feeling really nervous about sort of where to start and what to talk about and being caught off guard by things I might not know. So this is where using these surveys can be really useful. If your predecessor or someone else in the office has left you that kind of information, you can sort of read up and get a little bit of information. This might be extreme, but I also just went to the main office and looked through the students' high school files just for anything that might pop out as relevant or interesting, reviewed transcripts carefully before each meeting, and then just sort of tried to listen as well as I could and have a few questions prepared to ask to kind of keep the conversation rolling. So I think that's a skill that you just get. It just becomes easier and easier the more that you learn and the more that you know. You can see behind me back here, this is my map of colleges in the US. Many of us probably use this map. And I keep it as a crutch, and it was extremely helpful, especially during my first year. It continues to be a tool that I can't live without, which is why it's featured so prominently here in my office. But just to refresh my memory on what colleges, this one has only 4-year colleges, but there's also one available that has 2 and 4-year colleges. But it helps me remember which colleges are where. Sometimes just having that visual crutch to kind of like, what's the name of that place I've heard of in Kentucky? Like just to remember what's out there, and also to kind of look at it with students and families. It's a way to kind of refresh your memory and keep you on top of things. And then my favorite answer is always, let me do some research on that and get back to you. And I think most families are satisfied as long as you can follow up with them. Even if you don't know the answer immediately, if you can go find the info and bring it back to them, that's going to kind of take care of their needs, and it helps you appear to be, a thoughtful person who's going to take the time to really research on their students' behalf. So you should, I think, never be afraid to say, I don't know that off the top of my head, but let me do some work and find you some information, or here's some places you can go and look for that information. So don't be afraid to say you don't know.
Amelia, what's the make on that map? Like, who's it by if somebody wanted to find it?
It's called, I think it's Hedberg Maps. I can send it out.
That's it.
Is that it? Okay, Hedberg, and they make an assortment of really strange maps that that all kinds of people probably use, but in small numbers. Like, this is so specific to our purposes, but it's a great tool, and you can get it laminated and stick it on your wall like I have, and it's so useful. I don't think I could function without it. I've gotten so used to having it. So
we use that map. We have the wall size version right outside of our office, and we use it with our seniors to pin the map. So they put a pin when they apply and a flag when they attend, and that's how our families follow along with what they're doing. So those are great resources. Well, we are going to respect your time for our panelists and for our attendees, but this has been a fantastic conversation, and so well-timed. It is so pertinent. We are all thinking about juniors while still loving on and holding our breath on behalf of our seniors. So it's nice to have this conversation among colleagues. And I have a laundry list of things that we're going to talk about offline to put together, including copies of different schedules that our schools run, timelines for working with students, sample case study programs or even potential cases, and then Sam's wonderful list of 130 schools that has been asked for by many, many people. We'll put all of those resources in together, and when we send the follow-up, we'll make sure to include that for you. But we couldn't do this without SACAC's greater participation, so thank you for tuning in, and thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to posting this online for future use. So have a wonderful day.